Hey everyone, I'm Lori Kirkstead, and this is The Imposter's Guide to Authentic Leadership, a podcast for new leaders who are ready to stop depending on external approval and start trusting themselves. This series is based on my book of the same name, so if anything you hear today hits a little too close to home and you want to go deeper, that's where to go next. Alright, so this podcast is for people who got promoted because they were really great at their jobs, and then realized that leadership felt a lot less like an accomplishment and a lot more like starting over from scratch. Last episode, we talked about heart, specifically the difference between absorbing everyone else's feelings and actually being present in a way that helps people move forward. Today, we're on to the fourth dimension, and that's relationships. And I want to say up front, this one made me look at something about myself that I really didn't want to see. So Dr. Bill George talks about relationships as the dimension where everything else you've been building either becomes actual or stays theoretical. Purpose, values, heart, self-discipline, all of that lives inside of you. You can work on it privately and you can get better at it without anyone watching, but relationships need another person, which means the work is always happening in real time, in front of people, with consequences that you can't always predict or control. His point is that trust doesn't get built in one moment of honesty or like one well-handled conflict. It builds up through ordinary interactions that don't feel like much while they're actually happening, like the way you respond when someone pushes back on your thinking, or let's say whether you explain a decision in a way that brings people into the reasoning or just hands them the conclusion and expects them to fall in line. People are watching all of it, and they're drawing conclusions long before anyone calls it trust. I've always been someone who builds actual relationships at work, and I'm seriously not just talking about the transactional kind. I'm talking about the kind where you know about someone's kids, you laugh at the same things, talked about the shows you watched over the weekend, or you text each other outside of work because you want to, not because you have to. I still have a group chat from a job I left so many years ago. I even have a friend from an ed tech company I worked at, like many years ago again, who I had to stop and ask him how we met because I couldn't remember like the origin of our relationship because we had gotten so close. You know, we're so close now that he's actually my kid's Uncle Brian. And I don't mean that as a cute nickname. That's literally what happens when you let work be human. I know with my brand, Content Uncomplicated, it really didn't get built on a marketing strategy. If you really peel back the layers, it was built on the relationships that I had been pouring into and developing over the years before I actually needed anything from them. And the fact that this held is something I really think about a lot. But that same instinct also meant I had to learn something that hit harder than really almost anything else in my career. Being liked is not the same as being safe. Somebody being warm to you does not mean that they are actually invested in you. My first layoff shattered something inside of me that I didn't even know I was relying on because I guess I confused warmth with loyalty, and I read the friendliness as depth, and I built this whole story in my head about what 8.5 years of relationships were worth. You know, where one connection I'd invested in would somehow matter when it counted. But when the call came, it wasn't just the job that disappeared. It was that entire story I'd been telling myself about what those relationships actually meant. The anger was easy. I know how to be angry. But underneath the anger was something softer and a lot harder to admit. And that had been, I had been keeping score in a game nobody else knew we were playing. Every time I showed up for someone, every hard conversation I stayed present for, or like every time I picked the relationship over the easier path, I'd been filing it away somewhere as evidence that I mattered. It didn't work out the way that I'd pictured, not because those people were bad or wrong, but because they were just playing by a different set of rules than I was. And I hadn't realized until the exact moment that I had been playing by a set of rules that no one else had agreed to. What I eventually had to sit with was that I'd been building relationships as a form of security. Like if I invested in people as a way of making sure nothing would go wrong, like they would catch me, I was crazy thinking that. But the worst part was that I couldn't tell the difference until the moment it failed to do the job that I unconsciously built it to do. And then while writing this book, guess what? It happened again! A second layoff. That one hurt too, but it felt different. I was close with the leadership team and we all respected each other, and when the numbers weren't there and the decision came down, I could see it was coming. I could separate the relationship from the outcome in a way that I honestly never ever could the first time. I understand business is business, and sure, I was still pissed off, but I didn't let it take over my life. The first layoff was still sitting in the back of my mind and reminding me that, someone liking you doesn't make you feel safe. And instead of making me feel bitter, I actually used it to my advantage. And that awareness made everything clearer. I could hold on to both things at once. I stopped with this black and white thinking, all or nothing. It's all shades of gray and nuance, right? So if I could hold on to both things at once, these are good people who care about me. And this is still a business that's going to make decisions no matter how much we all enjoy working together. Both times I tried my hardest not to burn a bridge. And that really wasn't grace. It was understanding that relationships outlast all of this business nonsense. Businesses can go out of business, they can go bankrupt, but you can still have those relationships. And how you leave matters just as much as how you show up. People pleasers build connections that hold up when things are easy and sometimes fall apart the moment they're not, because we maintain relationships the same way we maintain our own peace, by keeping everything pleasant. People like us are generous. We remember the details. We show up for people, but we rarely let relationships get uncomfortable, which means they rarely get deep either. There's also a sneakier version of this that I think is a lot harder to catch from the inside, confusing being needed with being trusted. When your team keeps coming to you and your calendar's full of people who want your ear, it can feel like proof that the relationships are solid. But need and trust are different things. I'm repeating that again. Need and trust are different things. And people pleasers sometimes end up building cultures where they're indispensable in a transactional sense without being known by anyone. That is a super lonely place to end up. And it can take years to notice, because I know it did for me. Because warmth stays there, and nothing on the surface tells you that something's missing. The hardest relationship skill I've developed in leadership is not building connection. I've always been able to do that. What it is, it's learning to see my connections clearly for what they actually are, instead of inflating them into something they're not because the inflated version feels safer. And it's continuing to show up with the same care even after the picture looks nothing like I thought I was building. That's what George means when he talks about relationships as a dimension of authentic leadership. He's pointing at the willingness to stay present and grounded with people even after the story you told yourself about them has to change. So before the next episode, here is something worth sitting with. Think about a relationship at work that feels close on the surface. Now ask yourself, has it ever survived an uncomfortable moment? Has that person ever told you something you didn't want to hear, or have you ever told them? If the answer is no, that relationship might not be as deep as it feels, and that's worth knowing now instead of finding out later when the stakes are higher. Anyone can get in a relationship and be all lovey-dovey in the first month, but go through some stuff together and see how that relationship evolves. All right, in the next episode, we are on to the fifth and final dimension, which is self-discipline. And fair warning, if you're a people pleaser like me, this one is going to flip what discipline means on its head. All right, so this podcast is just a peek into the book, which has the full framework from Dr. Bill George, plus all of the exercises that go along with it. You'll find info on where to grab it in the show notes, and if you know a new leader who needs to hear this, please send it their way. It really helps get the word out. All right, that's it for episode 9. Can you believe it? I'm so glad you're here. Again, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.